So you want to own a coffee brand. Not just a coffee shop, a brand. The kind with a logo people tattoo on their forearms. The kind that shows up on a to-go cup in the background of someone's Instagram story. Silently signaling that this person has taste, that this person is awake before 9, that this person understands the difference between a flat white and a latte, and judges you quietly for not knowing. You picture the exposed brick, the hand-lettered chalkboard menu, the barista who knows your order before you say it. You picture yourself as the person who built that world, who turned $4 a cup into an empire, who took the most ordinary ritual on earth, a hot drink in the morning, and made it feel like an identity. It's a good dream. It's also one of the most quietly brutal businesses in retail. And almost nobody who starts one understands that until the second year, when the math finally catches up to the mood board. Start with the bean, because everyone else does, and because the bean is where the illusion is strongest. A pound of green coffee, unroasted, bought on the wholesale market, might cost you somewhere between $3 and $6 for a reasonably good specialty grade lot. More if you're chasing single origin lots with a story attached, a named farm in Huila, or a washing station in Yurgashev, because in this business, the story is a line item. Roast that pound, lose some weight to moisture, and you get roughly 14 to 16 ounces of roasted coffee. Brew it properly, and a pound makes somewhere around 40 to 60 cups depending on your ratios. Do the arithmetic and the coffee itself. The actual plant matter in your $4 cup costs you somewhere between 15 and 30 cents. This is the number that gets quoted at parties. This is the number that makes coffee sound like the greatest markup in the history of commerce. Better than diamonds, better than bottled water, a raw material so cheap that everything after it is pure profit. That number is true, and it is also almost entirely irrelevant, because coffee is not a coffee business. It is a real estate business, a labor business, and a logistics business that happens to serve coffee. Start with the real estate, because the real estate decides everything else before you've roasted a single bean. A coffee brand lives or dies on foot traffic, and foot traffic has a price, and that price is rent. In a dense urban corridor, the kind of street where your brand actually has a chance of being discovered rather than hunted down by loyalists who already love you. You are looking at commercial rent anywhere from $40 to over $100 per square foot per year, sometimes considerably more in the neighborhoods where coffee culture actually thrives. Because those are the same neighborhoods where every other retail category wants to be too. A modest coffee shop, maybe 1,200 square feet with some seating, can carry an annual rent bill running well into 6 figures before a single employee clocks in. Layer on triple net charges, your share of property taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance, and the number climbs further. The industry rule of thumb says rent should sit around 10% of revenue if you want a healthy business. In practice, in the neighborhoods with the best light for photographs and the best density of caffeine-dependent professionals, rent regularly runs higher than that, and you either accept a thinner margin or you accept a location where nobody walks past your window. Then there's the build-out, the part nobody photographs for the opening day post. Commercial kitchen equipment, espresso machines that cost anywhere from $6,000 for a modest 2-group setup to well over $20,000 for the multi-boiler machines the serious shops run, plus grinders that cost almost as much as the machine itself, because grind consistency is the actual skill separating good espresso from bad, plus refrigeration, plumbing, ventilation hoods, ADA-compliant bathrooms, electrical upgrades to handle the load, add furniture, signage, permitting, health department fees, a point-of-sale system, and the design work that makes the space feel like a brand instead of a room with chairs in it. Total build-out costs for a single coffee shop location commonly land somewhere between $200,000 and $500,000. And that's before payroll has covered a single shift. Now the labor, which is where the fantasy of the passive coffee empire goes to die. A cup of coffee is not a product you can leave on a shelf. It requires a human being to steam the milk, pull the shot, call the name, wipe the counter, restock the pastry case, and do all of this correctly under time pressure during a 7 to 9 a.m. rush that determines whether the day is profitable or not. Skilled baristas expect real wages, not because coffee shops are generous, but because bad espresso technique burns beans, wastes milk, and drives customers to the shop across the street with the better latte art. Add payroll taxes, workers' compensation insurance, and, in a growing number of markets, mandatory health benefits or paid leave requirements once you cross certain employee count thresholds, and labor typically eats 25 to 35% of revenue. Combine labor with the cost of goods, the coffee, the milk, the pastries, the cups, the lids, the syrups, the oat milk upcharge that customers resent paying, and shops can't afford not to charge. And you're often looking at another 28 to 35% gone before rent is even subtracted. Add rent, insurance, utilities, credit card processing fees that quietly take another 2 to 3% of every transaction, marketing, repairs, and loan payments. And the operating margin on a well-run independent coffee shop typically lands somewhere between 3 and 10%. Some manage better, many manage worse. A business that turns your $4 cup into 15 cents of raw coffee somehow, by the time it reaches the bottom line, is turning it into about 30 cents of actual profit. And that's on a good day, in a good location, run by someone who knows what they're doing. This is the part where the brand ambition changes the equation, for better and for worse. Because you didn't just want a coffee shop. You wanted a coffee brand. Something that could scale, that could open a second location, then a third, then maybe license itself out to someone else entirely. And scaling a food and beverage brand is one of the few businesses where growth can bankrupt you faster than stagnation ever could. Consider the two paths. The first is company-owned expansion. You open location 2 with your own capital or a loan. Then location 3, each one carrying the same build-out costs, the same labor bill, the same rent exposure multiplied. This path lets you keep control of quality, keep the full margin, and keep the brand consistent. But it also means every location is a fresh 6-figure bet, and a single underperforming store can drag down the entire operation's cash position, because coffee shops don't fail gracefully. They fail while you're still paying rent on the lease you signed for 5 years. The second path is franchising or licensing, the model that turned regional coffee names into national ones. Here, you're not selling coffee anymore. You're selling the right to sell coffee under your name. Franchises pay an upfront franchise fee, often somewhere between $20,000 and $50,000 for an established coffee brand, plus ongoing royalties, typically running 5 to 8% of gross sales, plus a marketing fund contribution of another 1 to 3%. This model looks, on paper, like the dream finally realized: passive income. Someone else fronting the build-out capital, someone else managing the 7 a.m. rush while checks arrive from royalties. And it can work. It has built genuine empires. But it transfers a huge portion of your control to people whose competence you cannot fully vet, whose local execution determines whether your brand is remembered as consistent or as the place that ran out of oat milk and had a rude employee on a Tuesday that one customer will remember forever. A franchise brand's real product isn't coffee. It's brand trust sold in bulk, and brand trust is catastrophically easy to destroy and expensive to rebuild. Then, there's the ingredient that makes every coffee brand's economics genuinely fragile in a way most retail businesses aren't. The commodity itself is volatile. Coffee trades on global futures markets, and the price of the raw bean swings with weather in Brazil, disease pressure on Vietnamese Robusta crops, currency fluctuations, shipping disruptions, and speculative trading that has nothing to do with your shop at all. In recent years, wholesale green coffee prices have moved by wide margins within a single season. a frost in a growing region, a drought, a shipping bottleneck, and suddenly your cost of goods has shifted meaningfully without you changing a single thing about your operation. Most shops can't pass that cost increase directly to customers overnight, because a $4 latte becoming a $4.50 latte is a decision customers notice and sometimes punish, and coffee is a business built on habit. Habits are sticky, but they're also easily broken by a competitor undercutting you by 50 cents at the shop 2 blocks over, and there is always a shop 2 blocks over. Coffee has one of the lowest barriers to entry of any food service category, and one of the highest saturation rates in the categories where it succeeds. Once a neighborhood proves it will support one coffee shop, it attracts 3 more within 18 months. And now you're not just competing on quality, you're competing on rent tolerance, meaning whoever can survive the thinnest margins the longest wins the corner. Add the pressure from above. The national chains with negotiating power on bean sourcing, real estate that lets them absorb a bad year, and marketing budgets that make your handwritten sandwich board look like a lemonade stand. And the independent brand is squeezed from both directions, undercut by chains on price and convenience, and undercut by hyper-local micro-roasters on authenticity and story. There's another cost nobody budgets for in the early daydream, and it's the cost of the chairs. A coffee brand isn't just selling a beverage, it's selling a seat, a table, an hour of someone's laptop time, an outlet to charge a phone, and none of that generates a cent beyond the original $4 purchase. Retailers call this the third place model, the idea that a coffee shop succeeds by becoming somewhere between home and work, a place people linger. Lingering is wonderful for the brand and murderous for the unit economics, because seating is square footage you're paying rent on that isn't turning over inventory. A table occupied for 3 hours by a single customer nursing 1 drip coffee is, in pure revenue per square foot terms, one of the worst performing assets in the building, worse than the storage room, worse than the bathroom. Some of the most successful chains have quietly solved this by minimizing seating altogether and optimizing for walk-through volume instead, which tells you something honest about where the actual money is. Not in the atmosphere people fall in love with, but in the speed of the line moving past the register. Insurance and liability add another layer most first-time owners underprice. General liability, property insurance, liquor liability if you expand into an evening menu, workers' compensation, and increasingly, cyber liability coverage for the point of sale and loyalty app data you're now collecting on every customer who signs up for free birthday drinks. All of it is a real recurring cost, often running several $1,000s a year even for a single small location, climbing fast as you add locations and employees. None of it shows up on the mood board. All of it shows up on the profit and loss statement. And then there's the equipment nobody plans to fail, but always does. Espresso machines are mechanical systems running under pressure and heat for 12 to 16 hours a day, and they break. Boilers fail. Group heads need rebuilding. Water systems scale up with mineral deposits, depending on your local water hardness. A serious repair can run into the thousands of dollars, and it arrives without warning, usually during your busiest week, because that's when the machine is working hardest. Preventive maintenance contracts help, but they're one more fixed monthly cost stacked on top of rent, payroll, and loan service. One more obligation due, whether the shop is full or empty. This is where cash flow becomes the real enemy, more than any single cost line item. A coffee shop's revenue arrives in small, constant increments, $4, $6, $9 at a time, hundreds of times a day, which feels healthy because the register never stops ringing. But its expenses arrive in large fixed blocks. Rent is due on the 1st, in full, whether you sold 200 cups that day or 2,000. Payroll is due bi-weekly regardless of a slow week caused by weather or a competitor's grand opening down the street. Equipment breaks. An espresso machine going down for repair during a Saturday rush isn't an inconvenience. It's an existential threat to a day's revenue, and repairs are rarely optional or schedulable. Loan payments on that $200,000 to $500,000 build-out don't pause because January was slow, and January is always slow. Because coffee shops are disproportionately dependent on routine, and routines break during holidays, extreme weather, and anything that keeps regulars working from home instead of walking past your window. The businesses that fail in this industry rarely fail because the coffee was bad. They fail because they ran out of cash in the gap between a fixed monthly obligation and a revenue stream that fluctuates with the weather, the semester calendar, and whatever new place opened up the street. Almost none of this is funded with cash sitting in a savings account. It's funded with debt, and debt changes the entire emotional character of the business. Most independent coffee brands lean on some combination of SBA-backed loans, equipment financing, and personal credit lines, often personally guaranteed, meaning the owner's house or savings sit behind the loan even after the business is incorporated. Interest payments become another fixed monthly obligation layered on top of rent and payroll, and unlike rent, a loan doesn't come with a landlord, who might negotiate if times get hard. It comes with an amortization schedule that doesn't care about your slow February. The debt is what makes the difference between a shop that survives a rough stretch and one that doesn't. Two businesses with identical sales can have completely different fates depending on how much of their monthly revenue is already spoken for before the doors even open. This is also why so many coffee brands that look wildly successful from the outside, packed every morning, expanding to new neighborhoods, are, on the balance sheet, barely breaking even, servicing debt from the last expansion while trying to fund the next one. Growth. Financed by growth rather than by profit. A treadmill that only stops being a treadmill once the brand is large enough to renegotiate its own terms. And even when everything works, even when the shop is full every morning, the wholesale accounts are growing, the second location is profitable, the brand has real recognition in its market, the ceiling on this business is lower than people assume. Coffee is not a business with the operating leverage of software or the appreciating asset value of real estate. Your margin doesn't compound the way a subscription business's does, because every additional cup still requires an additional set of hands, an additional bag of beans, an additional unit of a perishable inventory that spoils if it isn't sold within roughly 2 to 4 weeks of roasting. Growth in coffee is linear at best, requiring proportional increases in labor, rent, and equipment for every meaningful increase in output. There is no version of this business where you wake up one morning and the revenue has scaled overnight without the costs scaling right alongside it. That's the part the 15-cent cup of coffee never tells you. The bean is cheap. Everything required to turn that bean into a repeatable, trusted, $4 daily ritual, sold by real people in real space under real financial pressure, is not. So you wanted to own a coffee brand. What you actually own, if you do this right, is a real estate lease you can't escape, a payroll obligation that doesn't care about the weather, a perishable commodity exposed to a global futures market you don't control, and a margin so thin that a single bad quarter can undo 2 good years. The brand, the logo, the story, the aesthetic people photograph isn't the business. It's the thing you build on top of a business that, underneath all of it, runs on the same unforgiving arithmetic as every other retail operation in history. Fixed costs that don't move, revenue that does, and a very narrow gap between the two where the actual profit is allowed to live. The dream was never really about the coffee. It was about the $4 cup making everything after it look effortless. Underneath it, someone is always doing the math at midnight, trying to make sure tomorrow's rush is enough to cover tomorrow's rent.